let's cover the history of education in 10 minutes, okay? So these are the books we relied on that we came up with. We use E.D. Hirsch's Cultural Literacy. E.D. Hirsch was part of a project back in the 1980s called A Nation at Risk. This was led by the U.S. Department of Education to analyze America's public education system and to make some commentary about it. The commentary came out, it was scathing, if anybody was around in those days. And there's actually a line in the report that sounds so radical, it's hard to believe it was in there, in a government report. And it said this: if a foreign power had tried to undermine the United States of America and inflict some terrible act of terrorism on us, what they would do is invent the public education system that we have today. That's literally what it said. Well, everybody in education land got mad because, it's easy to criticize education, right? I mean, who doesn't? That's just like a target that everybody takes a shot at. And so if you're in education, you get tired of that, and I get that. So the report was soundly criticized, and although it was a good report, it didn't answer any real questions about, well, then what should we do? So Hersh kind of went off on his own from the University of Virginia. He started just coming up with this, he wrote this book called Cultural Literacy. It's kind of what's wrong with schools, but it's also what schools ought to be teaching. And he talks about the importance of restoring a philosophy of classical education in schools. In other words, not teaching kids just so that they can do certain things or obtain certain jobs or acquire certain skills. They should be taught for knowledge. And he makes a case for all of the educational strategies that are being tossed out of teacher colleges throughout the country. Like memorization is a good thing, that math facts are worth remembering and committing to memory, that Americans should just know, as a function of being exposed to them and understanding them, certain key facts, certain parts of our vocabulary, so that when you have a conversation, the conversation has deeper meaning than what is just said or what you might read, that a child would understand an article in the Wall Street Journal as a function of background knowledge and be in the same conversation as what the author, let's say, or a movie producer or somebody at a business meeting was trying to convey. Good case in point is, at a business meeting, let's suppose the boss says, this little weakness we've got in our product is the Achilles heel. That's our Achilles heel. Well, that assumes that everybody knows a little bit about Greek mythology, that you know the story of Achilles' mom holding him by his heel and dipping him in the water. What was that, the Styx River, the protective water, and she pulls him out, and she's just hanging on by that little piece of the back of his foot, and that's where the Achilles tendon is now, and so that's the point of weakness. So if you know that story, you've got so much of a deeper understanding. And so I can go example after example after example. Half of this book is just key dates and historic events. I'm just flip through back here. I mean, just lists them of things people should know. So I just flipped to J and K here. So they should know Kabul, Franz Kafka, Kamikaze, Kangaroo Court, Kansas City, Missouri, Immanuel Kant, Das Kapital, John Keats, Helen Keller. I just flip through here. There's to be truly literate, somebody should know St. Nicholas, nicotine, Nietzsche, Nigeria, Niger River, Night Before Christmas, Florence Nightingale, nihilism, Nile River, Nimbus Clouds, 9 Days Wonder, Nirvana, nitrogen fixing, Richard Nixon, Noah and the Flood, Nobel Prize, and it goes on. And it goes on. So it's. So he develops that into a curriculum, which is this book over here on the right side. And the curriculum, again, is classically oriented, and it defines what we learn. We don't make up what we want to teach at the school. It's driven, this is the core of it, the core part of our strategy toward obtaining knowledge, core knowledge curriculum. You might have heard of it. That's what it really is. And in this book in the middle, Why Johnny Can't Tell Right and Wrong, that's the book that informs our character education component to it as well. So it's a grand conspiracy with parents. For every grade in the sequence, there is a book like this that comes home with the parents. And the book this is the 6th grade book. So there's a kindergarten book, 1st grade book, what every kindergartner should know, what every 1st grader should know, what every 6th grader should know. So when little Johnny comes home, Johnny's always got the same, oh, look at there, I opened up to a great page. So when Johnny comes home, my little Johnny, I don't have a Johnny, but if my little kids are the same as your little kids, and that is when they come home and you say, hey, Johnny, how was school today? The answer is always the same. It was okay, it was fine. What did you learn today? Nothing really, because kids have a conspiracy of their own. They don't want to talk about what goes on at school with their parents. They got a website where they learn how to evade your questions about school at the dinner table. But but we believe, a written curriculum is important, and a parent guide is important as well, because when I say, well, according to the curriculum map, Mrs. Jones says, well, you should be learning about John Locke and natural rights today, so you should be able to tell me, what country did he come from, by the way? You should be able to tell me what is meant by tabula rasa. You should know this. You should know what that means, blank slate. Tell me about that. You should know about Montesquieu. You should be able to tell me about the Enlightenment in America at about that time. You should be able to tell me about the Women's March on Versailles. You should be able to tell me about the Declaration of Rights of Man. You should be able to tell me about the French Revolution. You should be able to tell me about Ellis Island, immigration to the cities. You should be able to tell me about these aspects of music, these aspects of math. You should be, and parents got the book. So kids there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. We got them. We have outsmarted the children at the school. All right, next slide. Let's keep skipping through some of these in interest of time. So our curriculum sequence, solid, specific, shared. Doesn't have to be the core knowledge curriculum at your school, but these are important elements. Okay, next. Common Core versus core knowledge. All right, well, this is just an unfortunate choice of words. We use the core knowledge curriculum, and so then the federal government comes up with this idea of Common Core. Yeah, we think that's a bad idea. Common Core is not core knowledge. They have nothing in common, really. Common Core is what we have in Colorado now and in all of your public schools. They've all adopted it. They all are acquiring Common Core books, and this is a bad thing in Colorado. So the state adopted the Common Core standards on a 4-3 vote. Very controversial then. It's controversial now. What we have essentially is a nationalized effort to develop a curriculum, standards first, then a curriculum, and then the new testing aspect of it is just being introduced in Colorado now. We've taken the first round of these tests that are pegged to these new standards. Here's what you need to know. They are not ambitious. They are low standards. They are college and career. They're oriented toward college and career readiness. When you peel the layer of the onion and figure out what that means, it is community college readiness. That is the standard in Colorado. Again, not internationally benchmarked. We will always know how we do in trying to teach these new standards and test to them year to year within our little framework of the United States of America, but kids in China, Singapore, Finland, places where they've got pretty good education systems, they're not bound to this. They're moving on. And American kids, it's very hard for America. And it's deliberately designed to be very, very difficult for you to figure out how your American kids are doing in relationship to those that they're competing with around the world. And they're not knowledge based. These are primarily skills-based standards that we're seeing as opposed to knowledge-based standards. I'm out of time to speak about why that's so important. Next slide. Next slide. Let's blast through this. All right. Gosh, there's no way to do this. All right. This is what good education should look like. We do nothing. People always ask. They come up. What are you doing that's innovative at this school? It's a fun answer because it shocks everyone. We do nothing innovative at my school. The number one performing school for 4 years in a row in Colorado does nothing innovative. All right. There is nothing new that you will find at my school. What you will find are lots of things that are old and have been thrown out for a variety of reasons. Education should look a little bit like this. We'll just start with some pictures. I've got a whole book. We all read a book together at my school this year. It was Climbing Parnassus, a case for Latin and Greek and what classical education is. So we spend all this time on that at the school, even just trying to narrow down what it means. But it looks like an expert who is conveying knowledge from one generation to the next. That's what you saw on that last slide. Go ahead and hit the next button. And so, there you go. So School of Athens, this Raphael painting that you see back at the Vatican, you recognize some of these people in here. Here's the thing to keep in mind. We think this is a serious aspect of education. You have very well-educated individuals in the same room together, and what Raphael was trying to suggest, these people come from different generations, but in this imaginary world here are the greatest minds in human civilization at that point in time. They're all together, and notice what they're doing. They are chatting, they are talking, they are sharing ideas. You see people writing some stuff down. You see some other people listening. You have a grand conversation about the best ideas. Classical education should be about those things that have been tested and proven, which society comes to agree as a result of years and years and years of this kind of dialogue. Those things which are good, that are true, that are perfect, that are beautiful. Those are the elements we feel are important to teach, and that summarizes that. It's the simplest way to say what classical education is. It's not really that simple, but next slide. Here we have a British school in the 1800s. Here's what I can tell you about what's going on here. That teacher was classically trained. She learned in Latin and Greek, okay? And you can tell just by the orientation, these kids are sitting in rows. They're all girls, the idea being eliminate distractions from the classroom. You can tell by the way they're dressed that they understand there's an important activity taking place here. Their parents got them up in the morning and said, you're not going to put on your work clothes. You're going to put on clothes that are appropriate for a school where something important is happening, and they do. The teacher reciprocates because she looks nice and she's reflecting respect back at those kids. You can see on their desks, they're all on the same page. They're all doing the same exercise. They're facing forward. There's no doubt in anyone's mind that that is the expert. That is the sage on the stage, key word, because that word is a bad word in education school today. That is the sage on the stage. And if you go to education school today, they tell you that sage on the stage is bad. You want to be a guide on the side and help kids kind of learn what they're interested in, learn at their own pace, differentiate their education. No. There comes a time for that once they are knowledgeable. And once they know what is important, once they have key facts committed to memory. When they're that age, they don't know what's important. They don't know what they're interested in. They don't know what they're going to do for a living. They don't know what the world's going to look like 5 years from there. They're too young. They need to be taught by an expert what is important and what they need to know. And that, friends, is what is missing in American schools today. Next slide. So here's my school. Looks the same. Sage on the stage is Mr. Dibzinski. Kids are sitting in rows. We think you can mix boys and girls these days, and it doesn't present quite a distraction. But we don't allow, other than sport gear like Miss Otto right there, we don't allow any writing. We don't allow any pictures in the dress code. They can wear almost anything they want as long as they're covered up. We don't want their clothing to be a distraction. In that room, you've got kids from extraordinarily wealthy families, and you've got kids sitting right next to them from extraordinarily poor families. Our goal is to make it so that you cannot tell the difference by looking at them, and you cannot tell the difference by that age based on what they know. The poor kids in my school are as smart and as well educated as the wealthiest kids in that school, and that's why we regard public education as the great equalizer in American society. It is a beautiful thing about my school. You would, unless I point them out and tell you where that kid comes from, and I know, you would not be able to tell who the poverty cases are, who's dealing with a child abuse issue at home, who's dealing with broken families and so on. The goal is to eliminate all of those distractions so that education becomes everyone's anchor and the source of everyone's value and merit in the school. Next slide. Same thing. Let's just breeze through these. So you'll see in every one of these images, there's no question who the expert is and the flow of information in the classroom. Next page or next slide. We believe knowledge, academic rigor, and facts are good things in a classical school. Next, and America ought to as well. Let's skip through all this in the interest of time. We do teach Latin starting in kindergarten in my school. If you can read fast, you can see all of that. Root for 90% of words in English, decoder for science and medicine. Next slide. And it also results, let's look at the last line down. I thought there was another line. Hit it again. There we go. Latin students score higher on the modern language, higher than modern language students on the ACT and SAT. We care about that. That's the college readiness test that all kids in Colorado take. Next slide. I kind of touched on that. Let's skip that. This is just important from the standpoint of philosophy, whether it's education or anything else. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, philosopher about the time the founders were signing our Declaration of Independence, our founders knew this guy. They relied on his philosophy. His philosophy was very important at the time because empires are falling, monarchies are in question, the need for them. There's this, not only is there the revolution brewing in the United States of America, but there's also revolution fomenting in France and an industrial revolution that is just changing everybody's world. It's not so easy to be a king or queen in those days. Rousseau comes up with this idea that human nature does not change, that human nature has, I got the wrong guy. Rousseau's, I'm thinking of John Locke. Rousseau's philosophy is just the opposite, that if you're a king or a queen and you want to maintain leadership in your monarchy and in your kingdom, you have to try to find ways to change human nature in order to serve the greater good of the whole. And so he turns that philosophy. There's not nearly enough time. I'm really sorry. He turns that whole philosophy into a philosophy for governing, but next slide. It also gets picked up by Heinrich Pestalozzi. This guy's name is actually painted on the ceiling of the Library of Congress. He's revered in the United States. Pestalozzi is Swiss. He's the basis for the Prussian education system, where children begin to be educated for the purpose of serving the state, okay, to fulfill the jobs that are needed and so on and so forth. Next slide. Pestalozzi, the Rousseau-Pestalozzi model comes to the United States. John Dewey's had more influence on your education than any other American. This is the guy who comes up with the idea starting around, hit the next slide, around 1916, right after First World War, that American schools need to be transformed in order to train students to work in an American economy. And our schools began the process of being transformed from knowledge-based classical institutions to job skills institutions. And starts out slow, but the biggest impact, next slide, just buzz through the next couple few, is that prior to John Dewey, your teachers, America's teachers, were taught in the discipline that they taught in. If you needed a history teacher, you would hire somebody with a history degree. Science teacher, you'd hire somebody with a science degree. Dewey's strategies applying psychology to education changed the way education was delivered so that teachers now need to understand the psychology of how children learn, everything from colors in the school to seating arrangements to reading styles, whether they are tactile learners or whether they're visual and auditory learners. And all of these kids need to be met at their level. And the idea of a sage on a stage goes away, and teachers become guides on the side, and a child's natural interest, what they're good at, ends up becoming the focus of what a child should learn. And the reason this is important in job training and job skills is because if you're not good at math and if you're not good at reading, maybe you need to work in a hotel and change bed sheets. And so let's get them trained. Let's start putting them on that track early on. Or if you have a mathematical aptitude, let's start training that kid to be an engineer now. And so schools start to become that, and they are throughout the country. Teachers' colleges spring up where the main focus is not the science or the math. It is instead the methods and the processes of teaching children at different levels based on their needs, their interests, their aptitude. And so it is. Today, you hire, if you're looking for a new teacher, Derek, you probably just went through this with your school. You go to the big job fair up at UNC or here at Metro, and all the teachers show up and they say, yeah, I'd like to work at your school. Great. Let's take a look at your resume. They have the degree in education. They got the brand spanking shiny new teacher certificate from the state of Colorado. And then they say, I got my degree in education, and I specialize in history. And so you'll ask, great, what do you know a lot about? Civil War. Excellent. Can you tell me why Lincoln fired McClellan? Well, I think he was with the North, right? And I'm not joking. That's the reaction you get from. That's very, very common. The point being is that the knowledge matters less than the methods in American schools today. We think that's wrong. Mark Tucker takes all this philosophy, brings it to next slide, brings it forward to the modern age. His organization is behind most of these things you see on the screen today. He was just a big speaker in Utah last week. Controversial, but he's our Common Core architect, really, and move forward with other people's money. All right. Whenever you see these buzzwords in public education, run from them, all right? And you see them all in your school. These are buzzwords that any teacher, administrator, these are even down at the Department of Education, these are all good words there. Trust me. You see these words, run from them. School to work, career, experiential learning, guide on the side, lifelong learning, critical thinking skills. I mean, we're for all these things, right? Critical thinking skills is an excuse for not knowing things. It's the notion that if I don't know a lot of facts about the Civil War, I'm a lifelong learner with critical thinking skills. I'll go read it somewhere when I need it. That's unfortunate because the conversation might be happening right now at your place of work. And if you don't know the background, you're just not in the conversation. You are experiencing less power. All right, there are dozens more. Let's skip through. Brian's hanging over me here to push me off the podium. I see that. Skip through all this. Keep skipping until we see John Locke here. Just keep pressing. Yeah, keep your finger right on there. There we go. John Locke, this is the guy we ought to be following in education. He comes up with the idea that human nature cannot be changed, that kids way back there in ancient Greece, Rousseau again. All right. Oh, okay. All right. Final words from Rousseau. Let's go. Here's 3 long run-on sentences, but let's go through these together. This is pretty amazing. This ought to scare you to think that is kind of this is the philosophy that defines American education today. Here's where it comes from, and you'll see parallels if you really think critically and honestly about American schools today and what we teach. This is kind of it. Keep in mind, his constituency are kings and queens and monarchs and elite society members who are trying to figure out how to keep farmers and merchants working for the greater good of the kingdom. So here's what he says. 3 run-on sentences. He who dares to undertake the making of a people's institutions, ought to feel himself capable, so to speak, of changing human nature, of transforming each individual who is by himself a complete and solitary whole into part of a greater whole from which he in a manner receives his life and being, of altering man's constitution for the purpose of strengthening it, and of substituting a partial and moral existence for the physical and independent existence nature has conferred on us all. You follow this? Here's the money line. He must, in a word, this is the leader. The leader must, in a word, take away from man his own resources and give him instead new ones, alien to him and incapable of being made use of without the help of other men. Individuals should not be dependent or independent on their own. They should be dependent on a social contract, is the essence of Rousseau's philosophy. The more completely these natural resources are annihilated, the greater and the more lasting are those which he acquires, and the more stable and perfect the new institutions, so that if each citizen is nothing and can do nothing without the rest, and the resources acquired by the whole are equal or superior to the aggregate of the resources of all the individuals, it may be said that legislation is at the highest possible point of perfection. So, there you have it. We need to change human nature to make us all dependent on one another in a grand social contract. Very different from the next guy. John Locke, human nature cannot be changed. That's really him. Cannot be changed. Human nature is the same as it was 2,000-3,000 years ago in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. We all care about the same things that they cared about back then. We love our families. We want our kids to have a better life than us. When we have things that we own, we want to keep them and improve them. We don't want to be violated by people taking things from us or being forced into slavery or bondage or anything along those lines. We care about all of those things, and if allowed to be free, we will pursue the greatest and highest goals of the individual, not necessarily that of the collective whole. This philosophy, by the way, is the same philosophy our founding fathers agreed with and built an entire nation on. This is what our Declaration of Independence essentially says. We believe that you're not stuck in the same rut that your family is. In other words, if your family was a wheat farmer, that you're going to be a wheat farmer because that's your only lot in life, and that's the way it was back 200. That's still the way it is in many places around the world. That an individual has the opportunity to pursue careers and to pursue knowledge and education in a whole new direction. Government by the consent of the governed, state of nature. He talks about is where we get the term natural law. Natural rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. All right, John J. Knox about that time says about the same time, writing about the same time as John Dewey. Basically says, if we had to assemble a room full of these kinds of people in America today, we could not do it. These people who founded our country learned in Greek. They learned in Latin. They were classically trained and classically educated. Yes, they became planters and surveyors and lawyers and physicians later in life. but they had a strong foundation of classical education that allowed all of those people to assemble in the room and talk about what a great nation ought to look like and how individuals are powerful and important. So Dr. Knox' philosophy gets written up in this next book here. And sits on the shelf collecting dust over at the University of Virginia for a number of years until, next slide, until our hero E.D. Hirsch dusts it off and uses it as the basis and the foundation for a resurgence of classical education in America today. His curriculum is the core knowledge curriculum, but there are other efforts at it in this area as well.